Welcome everyone. Today I'm bringing you another really fun collaboration with some other artists in this wonderful doll community. I have never customized a Rainbow High doll before, but I wanted to give it a go. So I got in touch with some other artists and organised for us all to customize this brand of doll for the first time together. The end result is 3 beautiful, colourful and extremely cute dolls. The other 2 creators in this collaboration are Stephoodoll and the DolliCrafter, so make sure you check out their dolls and their videos. The doll I chose to customize is Poppy. The idea I had was to create a Snow White inspired doll, and her pale skin would make her the perfect base for this project. I remove her head off camera and also chop off her hair just with a pair of scissors. I take my X-Acto knife and start cutting out a panel in the back of her head. I'll use this opening to remove the rest of her hair plugs and also to change her inset eyes. I'm not exactly sure what this tool is called, but it's like halfway between scissors and pliers. It's my favourite tool to remove hair plugs on any style of doll. The vinyl on Rainbow High doll heads is very firm, so I put her head in boiling water to soften it, which will allow me to easily pop out her eyes from the front. So that I can easily install my own eyes later on, I go back to my X-Acto knife and trim away all the vinyl in that eye area. As usual, I use 100% pure acetone to remove her factory makeup, making sure to wipe her entire face as this line of dolls has a shimmery highlight covering all of their skin. Unfortunately, there is a little crack or cut above one of her eyes. I'm not sure if it's a factory mistake or not, but hopefully I can disguise it with her eye makeup. I start by adding back in some shimmer on her face with some Pearlex powders. I then take red and pink watercolour pencils to start sketching out her lower waterline. I add some shadows with brown pencil and start drawing her top eyeliner in black. Since Snow White is meant to have skin as white as snow, I wanted to avoid any darker contours, and instead I highlight pretty strongly. I use white and cream pan pastels to add pigment to the high points of her face. I also start blushing her cheeks and building up colour on her lips. To enhance the realism of her complexion, I use a light blue pastel to add cool tones to her face. I spray the face with a layer of Mr. Super Clear, and then go on to add some more details to her lips. I also use a clean wet brush to spread the pencil pigment. I sketch in the crease of her eye socket with pencil, and then go in with pastels to soften the line and make it look more like a shadow. I also use pastels to start creating the shape I want for her eyebrows. This is my favourite way to shape a pair of brows, as it's super easy to go back and forth with the pastels and a kneaded eraser until you make the perfect shape and they both match. Once I'm happy with the shape, I start sketching in the individual hairs of the brow. I've started enjoying doing eyebrows and eyelashes over many layers of MSC, which allows me to build up colour and detail really easily. So on this first pass, I just add a few hairs on each side. I plan on adding 3D lashes to the top of her eyes, so I only draw in bottom lashes for this girl. I then go in and start adding white highlights to her face. I love this step so much, it brings lots of contrast and vibrance to the face, even if it's not super realistic. I do a little extra work off camera, and this is what she looks like now. To enhance the details and opacity of the colours, I go in with acrylic paints on the tiniest brush that I own. I start with black on the eyebrow hairs and the eyelashes, and then I add white paint all over the pencil highlights to make sure they really stand out. I take the pearl pigment that I used to highlight her face on a small wet brush to create a pigment I can use on her eyelids to make them super shiny. To finish off her face, I add gloss to her lips and to her lower waterline. Onto her eyes. I found it really hard to figure out what size molds to use for a rainbow high doll, so I bought a couple of different sizes online. I ended up choosing this one, and for anyone curious, the iris size is about 1 centimeter and the overall size is around 2 centimeters. I mix up some UV resin with white alcohol ink until it turns opaque. I pour it into the mold slowly to avoid air bubbles, and then cure it under my UV lamp. To create her iris, I mix up some white milliput and add it to the concave area of the resin eye. I use a combination of tools, and also not tools, just things lying around my workroom, to sculpt the iris and the pupil. I add the striations to the eyes mostly using the blade of my X-Acto knife and a pin. I leave it overnight to cure, and then get to colouring it. I start giving the whole thing a coat of pastels, keeping in mind the top and bottom of the eye. I want to make the bottom half lighter, as that's how the eyes catch the light. I then take some paint washes and add them to the eyes. The washes will seep into the creases of the sculpt and enhance it. For extra sparkle, I also add some pearl and metallic pigments. To finish off the eyes, I create a dome of resin over the whole thing, and cure it once again under the lamp. The original Disney Snow White has brown eyes, so that was the colour I made first. But I also wanted to experiment with some hazel eyes as well. This time I also colour some resin brown and add it to the middle of the eye before doming it in clear resin. I also add some rhinestones as catch lights. I ended up really liking the hazel eyes, so that was the pair I went with. I used some putty to secure them in place in the back of her head. The last step for her face is to add lashes. I have this pair of beautiful fluffy lashes, which I cut down to size and then glue into the crease where the resin eyes meet the vinyl of the face. I glue the head pieces back together and also give it a quick coat of black paint. I'm going to be using wefts to do her hair instead of rerouting, so the paint job doesn't have to be too perfect. I then start at the back of her head and glue the wefts one at a time to her scalp. I use fabric glue because it's fast drying, meaning there's no chance of the weft moving around in the wet glue as I work. Originally, I wanted to give her the same short hair she wears in the movie, but once I was finished gluing the wefts, I just fell in love with her in long hair. The main reason she wears short hair in the film is just because that's what was fashionable in the year that the movie was made, so I don't mind changing that element on her. I knew I wanted to give her a headband, so I direct all the wefts to face away from where the band will lie. Then, I simply glue the band in place, and I have a beautiful seamless head of hair. I also just quickly go in and blush her hands. I also give her a little French manicure by painting the tips of her nails white. I needed to create my own patterns for her clothes, so I start by wrapping the doll in cling wrap and then covering that with masking tape. I can then sketch my design for the garment onto the tape, then cut it off, transfer it to paper, and bam, I have my own custom pattern. This one is for a stays, or corset, that will be on the outside of her outfit. I also make an undershirt with big puffy sleeves, and a pattern for a skirt. Now, when it came to her colour story, I really went on quite the journey. I was originally going to stick to the colours she was wearing in the Disney movie, but to be honest, I don't really love this combo, and I just finished a blue and gold doll for my Magical Girl collab, so blue and yellow seemed a bit too close. Then I stumbled across these vintage movie posters showing her in a yellow and red version of the dress. I really liked this and was going to make that the palette, but I knew I was going to embroider a floral design onto her outfit, and just felt as though green would be a better base colour for that. I also really loved that with her whole magic apple storyline, a green and red palette really leans into that. And maybe that sounds a bit silly, but I think it's cute because they're the colours apples come in. Anyway, I take this beautiful deep red fabric and cut out 2 of the stays patterns. I wanted to line this piece so that the edges would be really clean and smooth. I was worried that if I just hemmed one piece, it would end up looking a bit bumpy and not very sturdy. So I sew both pieces together, leaving a small gap so I can flip it right way out. Then I use a ladder stitch to sew up the bottom. I want to be able to lace up this stays, so I mark out where I want the eyelets to go, punch a little hole in the fabric, and then stamp on the little eyelets. I add 6 in the front, and then also 2 on each side to finish off the shoulder straps. Snow White's design in the movie feature a slashing in her sleeves. This is a historical fashion element where you have slashes in an outer garment which allow the colour of the undergarment to show through. I wanted to get the feeling of that across without actually using that technique, as I didn't feel like the slashing fit in with the aesthetic I was giving her. So instead, I decided to embroider little floral patterns in stripes along the sleeve. The design I wanted to go with was roses and brambles. I love the idea of having thorns incorporated into the design. Even though that's more of Sleeping Beauty's thing, something about it seemed very fairy tale-like to me. So for the sleeves, I add 1 big rose in the middle, and then add some brambleberries on either side. The technique I use for the rose is called a cast-on stitch. There are lots of amazing tutorials on YouTube teaching this method, so if you're interested, I really recommend checking it out. I also use an ombre thread for the roses, so as I add the petals, they gradually turn from a dark red to a pretty pink. I then gather up the sleeves and hand sew them onto the bodice of the shirt. I do all my sewing by hand, which takes hours and hours. That's why I tend not to show it here on my channel, because it would make the video so long. I also decide not to hem the bottom of the shirt. This will help me tuck it into the skirt when I dress the doll. For some reason, this colour of green really messes with my camera, so I didn't film most of this process. I tried to make my own shoes for this doll and completely failed. I found the doll house on Etsy and they absolutely saved my life. They were so helpful and friendly, and they made a custom pair of flat shoes, painted and varnished them, and sent them to me the next day. They even added a spare pair just in case, which was so sweet of them. If you ever need anything for your Rainbow High dolls, make sure to check them out on Etsy and Instagram. Finally, I had to make her an enchanted apple. I sculpted this out of clay and add a base coat of red paint and brown to the stem. Then I bring out this magical set of shifting watercolour paints. I add a swirly pattern all around the apple and also just brush on some thin coats to give it a general shine. And with that, she's all done. Please like this video and subscribe if you want to see more of my content. Also leaving something in the comments below. I really love hearing what you all have to say. Please check out the other 2 dolls in this collaboration. They have these beautiful pastel, colourful dolls from Stephoodoll and the DolliCrafter. I'll leave the details in the description below. But without any further ado, meet my new Snow White. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like this video and to follow me on Instagram at Mr. Super Customs. See you next time. Have an awesome day.